"You were never supposed to arrive," the station agent said, not even looking up from his ledger. "Mr. Hayes married someone else 3 weeks ago." Clara Bennett stood holding his words like a blade pressed against her chest, unable to breathe, unable to move, unable to understand how a man could promise her forever and simply forget to tell her he changed his mind. If you've ever felt like the world moved on without you, stay with me, subscribe to our channel, follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Montana Territory, November 1887. Clara Bennett had exactly $3.40 left in the world. She counted them again, not because she hoped the number would change, but because the act of counting gave her hands something to do while the rest of her fell apart. The platform of Red Willow Station was empty now. The last passengers had collected their bags and disappeared into the warmth of waiting arms and waiting wagons. The station agent had gone back inside. The train had already pulled away, swallowed into the gray distance of the Montana evening, like it was in a hurry to forget it had ever stopped here at all. And Clara sat, beside a worn leather suitcase, alone. She was 24 years old, and she had never in her life felt so completely erased. It had started with a letter. That was the thing about hope, it almost always started with something small, something easy to hold in your hands. The letter had arrived 8 months ago, forwarded through a matrimonial agency based out of Denver. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. Like the man writing it wanted her to believe he thought carefully about everything he said. "Dear Miss Bennett, I am a rancher in Red Willow Valley, Montana Territory. I am not a man of fancy words or city polish, but I am a man who keeps his promises. I have a home, good land, and more room in my life than I know what to do with. If you are a woman of honest character who is willing to work hard and build something real, I would be honored to correspond with you further. Respectfully, Edward Hayes." Clara had read that letter 12 times before she wrote back. She was living in a cramped boarding house in Cheyenne at the time, taking in sewing and laundry work, sending most of what she earned back to a younger sister still living with their aunt. Their parents had died 4 years earlier, their father from a farming accident, their mother from grief 6 months after. Clara was the eldest. She had spent the last 4 years being responsible for everyone else. So when Edward Hayes wrote that he was a man who kept his promises, she believed him because she needed to. The letters went on for 6 months. Edward wrote about his cattle, his land, the way the mountains looked in the early morning when the mist hadn't lifted yet. He wrote about wanting a family, about how the ranch felt too quiet, about how he thought a good woman beside him would make the work feel like something more than survival. Clara wrote back honestly. She told him she wasn't delicate. She told him she knew hard work. She told him she didn't need a perfect life, only a real one. And with every letter she felt something she hadn't felt in years, like she mattered to someone, like her future was actually a place she might want to arrive. By the 4th month, he asked her to come. He sent a train ticket. He signed his letter with "All my heart." And Clara packed everything she owned into one leather suitcase, told her sister she'd send for her once she was settled, and boarded the train west, with her chest so full of hope she almost couldn't breathe. She should have noticed the signs. Later people would tell her that. Gently, carefully, with the particular kindness people use when they've already decided you should have known better. But here was the truth: when you've spent 4 years with your head down and your hands working and your heart waiting for something to finally go right, you don't look for signs. You just believe. The last letter Edward sent before her arrival was shorter than the others. She had noticed that. She told herself he was busy with the ranch. She told herself men weren't always expressive. She told herself a lot of things. She was good at that. The train had pulled into Red Willow Station at 4:30 in the afternoon. Clara stood at the top of the steps and looked out at the platform, half expecting to see a man waiting with some kind of sign, or at minimum the careful posture of someone who knew she was coming. There was no one. She waited 20 minutes on the platform while the other passengers dispersed. Then the station agent came out. He was a thin man with wire spectacles and an expression like someone had told him disappointing news so many times that his face had simply given up reacting. "You Miss Bennett?" he asked. "Yes," Clara said. "I'm looking for Edward Hayes. He was supposed to meet me." The station agent looked at his ledger. "You were never supposed to arrive," he said, not looking up. "Mr. Hayes married someone else 3 weeks ago." The words didn't land all at once. They came in pieces. Married. Someone else. 3 weeks ago. Clara stood very still. "I'm sorry," she said slowly. "Could you repeat that?" The station agent finally looked up. Whatever he saw in her face made him soften slightly, though not enough to change the facts. "Edward Hayes," he said carefully. "Took a wife on October 14th. Woman from Helena. Been arranged for some time from what I understand." He paused. "I'm sorry, miss. I don't know what he told you, but he's not coming." Clara looked down at the ticket in her hand. The return date was a week away. She had exactly $3.40. The ticket home would cost 7 quid. She didn't cry right away. That was the thing about the worst moments, they didn't always announce themselves with tears. Sometimes they came quietly, like a door closing somewhere very far away, and you didn't fully understand what had locked until much later. Clara sat down on the bench at the edge of the platform. She opened her suitcase. She took out the last letter Edward had sent her and read it one more time. "With all my heart." She folded it carefully. She put it back, and then she sat and watched the last light disappear behind the mountains and tried to think of a single person she could wire for help. Her sister had nothing. Her aunt had less. The boarding house in Cheyenne had already given her room to someone else. She'd cleared it out herself. There was no one. She was in a town she'd never been to, with a name that meant nothing to anyone here, and the man who had promised her a home had simply moved on. The cold came in fast after sundown. Montana in November didn't negotiate. Clara pulled her coat tighter and lowered her head and finally quietly let herself cry. Not the dramatic kind of crying that feels like release. The silent kind. The kind that happens when you've run out of arguments against your own despair. She didn't sob. She just sat there with tears running down her face and the empty platform stretching out around her, and thought, maybe I should have known better. Maybe some people just aren't meant to be chosen. "Don't sit alone, miss." The voice came from her left, low, steady, not unkind. Clara looked up fast, embarrassed she hadn't heard anyone approach, and found a man standing a respectful distance away, hat in hand, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. He was tall, lean, the kind of build that came from actual work rather than intention. His coat was worn at the elbows. His boots were practical. He had dark eyes and a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in several days, and he was looking at her not with pity exactly, but with something she recognized. Recognition, like he knew something about what she was feeling. "I'm fine," Clara said, and wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Thank you." "No," the man said quietly. "You're not." She blinked. People usually accepted "I'm fine" because it was easier than the truth. "I didn't ask for company," she said. "I know you didn't." He still hadn't moved closer. "But the station closes in an hour. Temperature's going to drop another 15 degrees tonight. And I'd feel wrong leaving a woman alone out here with nowhere to go." He paused. "Unless you've got somewhere to go." Clara looked at the closed station door, then at the empty road beyond the platform, then back at her suitcase. "I don't know you," she said. "My name is Nathan Cole," he said. "I own a ranch about 4 miles north of town. I came in today for feed and supplies." He nodded toward the road where a wagon was hitched to a patient-looking brown horse. "I've been standing over by that wagon for the last 10 minutes trying to decide whether to mind my own business." "Why didn't you—" Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile. "Because I've been in a place like this before," he said simply. "Not the same way, but the feeling of it." He looked at the ground briefly. The feeling that the world just went on without you while you were standing still. Clara stared at him. "You don't know anything about me." "No," he agreed. "But I know that bench is cold, that station is closing, and that nobody should spend the night alone outside in November." He held out his hand, not reaching for her, just offering. "My ranch isn't fancy," he said. "The house is old and the work is hard, but there's a spare room with a proper door and a lock if that matters to you, and I'll take you into town in the morning so you can figure out your next step." Clara looked at his hand, then at his face. She had just been destroyed by a man she trusted based on 6 months of letters. Every reasonable thought she had told her to refuse. But reasonable thought hadn't gotten her very far lately. "Why would you help a complete stranger?" she asked. Nathan Cole looked at her steadily. "Because someone helped me when I had nothing," he said, "and I never got the chance to pay it back." The wagon ride was mostly silent. Clara sat on the bench beside Nathan with her suitcase between her feet and watched the dark road unroll ahead of them. The horse moved at a steady pace. Nathan didn't push it. He didn't fill the silence with questions either. Clara had braced herself for that, for the inevitable. So what happened? Who was he? Why did you come all this way for a man you'd never met? But it didn't come. Nathan Cole drove his wagon and let her be quiet. After about a mile, she found herself saying it anyway. "He lied to me." "He sent me letters for 6 months, asked me to come, sent a train ticket." She laughed short and humorless. "Married someone else 3 weeks ago." "I'm sorry," Nathan said. "The station agent told me. Not even he didn't even bother to send a message, just let me arrive." She shook her head. "I don't understand how someone does that." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Some people," he said carefully, "decide other people don't matter before those other people even know the conversation is over." Clara turned to look at him. "That's a very specific thing to say." "I've thought about it some," he said, and didn't elaborate. She faced forward again. The mountains were dark silhouettes against a sky thick with stars. She'd never seen so many stars. "Back in Cheyenne, the town lights ate them up. I have $3.40, she said. "The ticket back to Cheyenne costs $7. I don't have anywhere to go in Cheyenne anyway. I gave up my room. My sister is in Laramie and she doesn't have room for me and I can't ask her to try." She paused. "I'm telling you this so you understand I'm not someone who takes charity. I'm someone who is currently in a very bad position through absolutely no fault of any reasonable decision I made." Nathan almost smiled. She saw it at the corner of his mouth. "I believe you," he said. "I'll work," she said. "Whatever needs doing. I'm not afraid of hard work." "I believe that too." "I'm not staying indefinitely," she said. "I'm not. I don't want you to think I'm trying to attach myself to me, Miss Bennett." She stopped. "You can figure all of that out tomorrow," Nathan said. "Tonight there's just a spare room and a hot meal." Clara closed her mouth, and for the first time since she'd stepped off that train, she let herself stop arguing. The ranch was small. She could see that even in the dark. The house itself was solid but weathered. A barn to the left, a few outbuildings fencing that had seen better days. Nothing about it suggested prosperity. Everything about it suggested stubbornness, like the whole place had simply refused to give up. She appreciated that more than she expected. Inside the house was plain and clean. A stone fireplace with a low fire already burning. A table with 2 chairs. A small kitchen with a wood stove. Everything was functional and nothing was unnecessary. Nathan put water on for coffee without asking her if she wanted any. She sat at the table and looked at her hands. "My wife and daughter died," Nathan said from the kitchen. He said it without preamble, without drama, just offered it up like it explained something. "6 years ago, winter storm. I was out checking the far pasture when it came in fast." A pause. "When I got back, they were gone." Clara lifted her eyes. He wasn't looking at her. He was watching the water. "I'm very sorry," she said. "I kept the ranch," he said. "Didn't really know what else to do with myself. Work is useful that way. It doesn't care how you're feeling. It just keeps being necessary." He poured the coffee, brought 2 cups, sat across from her. "Point being, I know what it's like when the thing you were counting on isn't there anymore. Clara wrapped both hands around her cup. "Your situation and mine aren't exactly the same," she said. "No," he agreed. "But the feeling of falling is pretty similar regardless of why." She looked at him across the table. "Why are you telling me this?" Nathan looked back at her. "Because you're trying to figure out if you can trust me," he said, "and I thought it might help to know I have my own reasons for understanding what hard looks like." Clara was quiet for a long moment. "Do you have a lock on that spare room door?" she asked. "I'll put one on tonight if you need it." She studied him, then she nodded. "Coffee's good," she said. Nathan Cole almost smiled again. "It's the one thing I've gotten right," he said. She lay awake in the spare room for a long time. It was a small room, a narrow bed, a dresser with a cracked mirror, a rag rug on the floor. Simpler than anything she'd stayed in for years, and somehow more restful than anywhere she'd been in months. The lock on the door was a simple iron latch Nathan had mounted in under 10 minutes. He hadn't made a production of it. Just got his tools, did the work, showed her it functioned, and said goodnight. Clara lay on her back in the dark and listened to the quiet. In her life, she'd made a habit of being practical, of not dreaming too large, of keeping herself grounded in what was real and possible and manageable. And still somehow she'd managed to travel 3 states on the word of a man who hadn't even had the decency to send a telegram. She thought about Edward's handwriting, how careful it was. She thought about, "With all my heart." She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and breathed through the anger. Not the grief anymore. Something sharper. "You were never supposed to arrive." She thought about what Nathan Cole had said. Some people decide other people don't matter before those other people even know the conversation is over, and she felt the truth of it settle into her chest like a coal. He had known that. He had said it with the particular quietness of someone who'd learned it the hard way. She didn't know yet what had happened to him beyond what he'd told her, but she knew enough to understand that he wasn't offering her shelter out of pity. He was offering it out of something more uncomfortable. Recognition. That she decided she could live with, at least for tonight. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, she slept without dreaming about what came next. The next morning came with the smell of wood smoke and frying salt pork. Clara was awake before sunrise, old habit from the boarding house years, where early meant first access to the washroom and the hot water. She dressed, washed her face from the basin on the dresser, pinned her hair, and walked out into the main room. Nathan was already at the stove. He glanced over his shoulder. "There's coffee." She poured herself a cup and leaned against the counter and watched him work. He moved efficiently. No wasted motion. The kind of easy competence that came from years of doing the same necessary thing alone. "I'd like to help with breakfast," she said. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I'd like to." He looked at her for a moment, then stepped aside and handed her the spatula. She took over the salt pork without discussion, and Nathan started cutting bread. They worked side by side in the small kitchen without speaking for a while. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of 2 people who had enough to think about without filling the air. When they sat down to eat, Nathan said, "What do you need?" Clara set down her fork. "I need to earn enough to get back to Cheyenne, or somewhere. I need to figure out what comes next." She paused. "I'm good with sewing. I can cook. I can keep accounts. I did the books for the boarding house for 2 years. I can work with animals if someone shows me what to do." Nathan listened. "I need someone to help run the house," he said. "And someone who can handle the supply records, the feed costs, and the catalogs. I've been keeping them in my head, which is no way to run a business. I can do that. I pay fair wages. You'd have the room and board and $2 a week until you've got what you need." Clara looked at him. "That's very generous." "It's fair," he said. "Different thing." She thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. "All right," she said. "I'll stay until I've got enough to figure out what's next." Nathan nodded and went back to his breakfast. And neither of them said anything about the fact that what's next was considerably less certain than either of them wanted to admit. The first week was work. Clara discovered 3 things immediately. The first was that the ranch was struggling. Not failing, but close enough that the difference required daily attention. The cattle were thin. The fences on the east pasture were in poor repair. The supply costs Nathan had been tracking in his head were eating more of his income than he realized because he had no system for comparing what went out against what came in. The second thing she discovered was that Nathan Cole was extraordinary with animals and nearly incompetent at paperwork. "How long have you been losing money on the east pasture cattle?" she asked on the 3rd day, sitting at the table with his scattered receipts and ledgers spread out in front of her. Nathan looked up from the harness he was repairing. "I haven't been losing money. According to these numbers," she said, "you've been spending about 30% more on feed for those animals than they return in value. They're on the wrong pasture. The grass quality is too low. You're supplementing with bought feed every month and not getting it back at sale." He stared at her. "How do you know that?" "Because I just added it up." She turned the ledger around so he could see. "If you move them to the north pasture, the grass there is better quality. They'll supplement less. You'd save close to $8 a month." Nathan looked at the numbers for a long time. "Nobody's told me that," he said. "Nobody's been looking," she said. The third thing she discovered was that the town of Red Willow had opinions. She heard about them from Mrs. Garrity, the wife of the feed store owner, who came by on the 4th day with a basket of preserves and an expression of transparent curiosity. "We heard a young woman was staying out at the Cole place," Mrs. Garrity said, sitting at the table with her hands folded like she was in church. "Of course, everyone just wanted to make sure you were," she paused meaningfully, "settled." "I'm working," Clara said, "keeping the accounts and managing the house." "Of course," Mrs. Garrity said. "And how long do you expect to—" "As long as necessary," Clara said pleasantly. Mrs. Garrity looked around the kitchen with the particular attention of someone cataloging evidence. "You know, Edward Hayes is a well-respected man in this county," she said carefully. Clara looked at her steadily. "Is that right?" "What happened? These things are complicated. Men sometimes have obligations that—" "Mrs. Garrity," Clara said, "I appreciate you coming by. Please take some coffee." The woman left an hour later with her basket and her opinions intact, and Clara stood at the window and watched her wagon disappear down the road. Nathan came in from the barn. "What did she want?" "To see if I was decent," Clara said. "What did you tell her?" "I gave her coffee and let her look." She turned. "Is Edward Hayes actually well respected here?" Something shifted in Nathan's face. "He has money," he said. "In this county, people confuse those two things." Clara filed that away. By the end of the 2nd week, she had reorganized the entire supply ledger, identified 4 places where Nathan was overpaying vendors, and started a kitchen garden from seeds she'd found in an old tin in the pantry. Nathan stood at the kitchen door one evening, watching her work the soil. "You don't have to do that," he said. "The garden space is going to waste. Vegetables are cheaper grown than bought." She sat back on her heels. "Is there a reason it wasn't planted?" "I never saw the point," he said. "Planting something takes hope, that it'll come up, that you'll be here to see it." Clara looked at him. "And you didn't think you would be—" He was quiet. "I didn't think it mattered either way," he finally said. She turned back to the soil. "It matters," she said, and drove the trowel in. Nathan stood there for another moment. Then he walked away without answering. But that evening, he came in from the barn earlier than usual and sat down at the table while she was making supper and said without any visible reason, "There's a perennial patch on the south side of the house. Iris bulbs, I think. My wife planted them." Clara didn't look up from the stove. "Do they still come up?" "Every spring?" he said. "I always meant to pull them." "Why?" A long pause. "Habit," he said. Grief gets into habits after a while. Don't pull them, she said. He didn't answer. But she noticed that the next morning, when she walked the south side of the house, he'd cleared the winter debris from around the bulbs, so they'd have room when the ground softened. 3 weeks into her stay, Clara went into town for supplies. She'd made a list. Nathan had given her money from the household account carefully noted in the ledger as she'd taught him. She drove the smaller wagon herself. Nathan had shown her how to handle the horse, and she'd taken to it immediately. She was at the dry goods store when she first heard his name. "You're the woman staying at Nathan Cole's place." She turned. The man standing in the aisle was well dressed by frontier standards. Good coat, good boots, a face that had probably been handsome a decade ago and now wore its age like a creditor waiting for payment. He was smiling. But the smile didn't reach his eyes. "I am," Clara said evenly. "Edward Hayes," he said. Her stomach dropped. She kept her face perfectly still. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "I heard you arrived." He kept smiling. "I'm sorry about the confusion. The communication between us broke down and—" "There wasn't any confusion," Clara said. "You sent for me. Then you married someone else. That's not confusion, that's a decision." His smile tightened. "A man's circumstances change," he said. "I hope you don't hold that against me." "I hold it against you precisely as much as it deserves," she said, "which I suspect is more than you're comfortable with." Something moved in his expression, gone quickly replaced with the smile again. "I understand you've made yourself quite at home at Nathan's ranch," he said. "Word gets around in a small town." "I'm working," she said, "keeping accounts." "How industrious." He tilted his head. "You know if you need assistance if Nathan's circumstances prove insufficient for your needs. I do have connections in the county. I could find you a more suitable position." Clara looked at him. "I have a suitable position," she said. "Clara, Miss Bennett," she said. "You don't have the right to my given name." The smile disappeared entirely, and in that moment she saw what was underneath it. Not embarrassment. Not remorse. Calculation. "I'll let you get back to your shopping," he said. His voice was smooth again. The smile recovered. "Give Nathan my regards." He walked away. Clara stood with her list in her hand and her heart hammering and made herself breathe. She didn't know why Edward Hayes was in Red Willow. She didn't know what he wanted. But she knew with the particular certainty that came from having been fooled once and learned from it that the man who had said with all my heart had never once meant it. And that whatever he was doing here, it had nothing to do with her. It had everything to do with something else. And Nathan Cole was somewhere in the middle of it. She put the list in her pocket and went to finish her shopping. And for the first time since she stepped off that train, she felt something replace the grief. Not hope exactly. Something harder. Something that didn't need rescuing. Something that was learning very quickly to pay attention. She arrived with nothing. And she was starting to understand that nothing in the right hands could become something worth protecting. She didn't tell Nathan about Edward right away. She drove the wagon back from town with the supplies loaded and her mind working faster than the horse's pace, turning over the encounter like a stone she wasn't sure she wanted to look under. The smile. The smooth recovery. The way Edward Hayes had said, "Give Nathan my regards," like the words themselves were a warning dressed up as courtesy. She unhitched the wagon, put the horse up, carried the supplies inside. Nathan was in the barn. She could hear him moving around in there, the low sounds of a man comfortable in his own work. She put the flour and the salt away. She set the coffee tin on the shelf. She hung her coat. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the ledger she'd been building for the last 3 weeks and thought about calculation. Edward Hayes hadn't come to that store by accident. Small towns didn't work that way. People knew when the supply wagon from the coal ranch came in. Someone had told him. And he had positioned himself, the good coat, the easy smile, the offer of a more suitable position, with the practiced efficiency of a man who rehearsed his performances in advance. The question wasn't what he'd wanted from her. The question was what he wanted from Nathan. Nathan came in from the barn 20 minutes later, pulling off his gloves. "Get everything on the list." "Yes," Clara said. "I ran into Edward Hayes." Nathan went completely still. Not the stillness of surprise. The stillness of a man who had been expecting something and was disappointed it arrived. "Where?" "Dry goods store." He introduced himself. She watched Nathan's face. "You knew he was in town." "I knew he was back in the county," Nathan said. He hung his gloves on the peg by the door. "Didn't know he'd approach you." "He offered me a more suitable position," Clara said. "Whatever that means." Nathan turned then. "He said that directly." "He was very polite about it," Clara said, which made it worse. Nathan crossed to the table and sat down across from her, and for a moment he just looked at his hands. When he looked up, his expression had the careful flatness of someone choosing words slowly. "Edward Hayes and I have a history," he said. "I gathered. It involves the land." "Tell me," she said. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My property sits on the north edge of a valley that the railroad has been surveying for a spur line. If that spur comes through, land in this county is going to triple in value, maybe more. Hayes knows that. He's been buying up parcels for the last 2 years quietly, through different names, so nobody notices the pattern." Clara leaned forward. "And your land?" "He's approached me twice," Nathan said. "Both times I told him no. The ranch isn't for sale." He paused. "After the second time I started having small problems. Feed supplier suddenly couldn't fill my orders. Bank got slow about processing my account. Nothing you could point at directly, nothing that would hold up if you said it out loud." "Pressure," Clara said. "Subtle pressure," Nathan said. "The kind that's hard to fight because there's nothing to grab onto." She looked at him. "How bad is it?" "I'm managing," he said. "Nathan." Something in her voice, the way she said his name direct and without softening, made him look up. "It's tight," he admitted. "Tighter than I let on. If 2 or 3 more things go wrong in the same season, I might not have enough to cover the mortgage and the operating costs both." Clara sat back. "And he knows that." "He's patient," Nathan said. "Men like Edward Hayes don't push hard enough to make enemies. They just wait." She stared at the ledger on the table between them. 3 weeks of numbers. 3 weeks of her own careful work, and now they looked different, not just a ranch struggling to be profitable, but a target being softened up by someone who had done this before. "He used me," she said. It came out quiet, flat. Nathan looked at her. "What do you mean?" "The letters, the invitation." She pressed her fingers flat against the table. "If I'd married him or even arrived and created a scandal, your reputation in this county takes damage by association. The abandoned woman who came to marry Edward Hayes shows up at the bachelor rancher's property instead. People talk. Suddenly your character is in question and your business relationships get harder." Nathan stared at her. "I didn't think of it that way," he said slowly. "I did," Clara said. "Just now. But it makes sense. It's the kind of move that costs him nothing and costs you something." She shook her head. "He didn't need me to marry him. He just needed me to arrive." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the wind moved through the eaves. "Clara," Nathan said carefully, "you don't have to be involved in this." She looked at him. "I'm already involved," she said. "He made me involved the moment he sent that first letter." Nathan held her gaze and didn't argue, because he knew she was right. Bond. The next morning, Clara started a second ledger. Nathan found her at the table before breakfast, a fresh notebook open in front of her, writing in her careful, even hand. "What's that?" "Everything you can remember about the feed supplier situation. Dates, names, what changed, and when." She looked up. "And the bank. Who handles your account, who you spoke to, what they said." Nathan poured his coffee and sat down. "You think he can be stopped?" I think information is the only thing that works against a man who operates in the gaps between things, she said. He's careful. He keeps his hands clean, but careful men make consistent patterns, and patterns can be documented. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Where did you learn to think like this? I ran a boarding house for 2 years, Clara said. You want to know where people hide problems they don't want you to find? Run a boarding house. People bury things in ledgers, in timing, in who they talk to and who they suddenly stop talking to. She tapped her pen on the notebook. Tell me about the feed supplier first. Nathan talked. She wrote. By the time breakfast was ready, they had 6 pages of notes. What nobody in Red Willow had quite reckoned with, because nobody had paid close enough attention, was the way the ranch changed in the weeks after Clara Bennett arrived. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't happen all at once. It happened the way most real changes happen, quietly, incrementally, in the daily accumulation of small decisions made better. The East pasture cattle were moved north. Within 2 weeks, their condition improved visibly. Nathan noticed it first, though he didn't say anything right away, just stood at the fence one evening, looking at them with the expression of a man revising an assumption. You were right about the pasture, he said finally. The numbers were right, Clara said. I just read them. Most people wouldn't have bothered, she shrugged. Most people don't understand that small losses compound. Lose $8 a month for 3 years, and you've lost nearly $300. That's not small anymore. Nathan looked at her sidelong. Where'd you learn accounting? My father, she said. He was a terrible businessman. Watching him taught me what not to do. She paused. He was a wonderful man. Just couldn't add. It was the first time she'd said anything light about her family. Nathan filed it carefully. What happened to him? Farming accident, she said. 4 years ago. My mother died 6 months later. She kept her eyes on the fence. She just decided she was done, I think. Grief does that to people sometimes. Yes, Nathan said quietly. It does. They stood at the fence together in silence that was different from the early silences, less careful, more settled. The kind of silence 2 people share when they've stopped wondering whether the other person is trustworthy. The morning it all nearly fell apart started like any other. Clara was in the kitchen with the ledgers when the knock came at the door. Nathan was in the barn. She answered it herself. The man on the step was not someone she recognized. Middle-aged official looking, with a leather satchel and papers under his arm. I'm looking for Nathan Cole, he said. He's in the barn. Can I help you? I have a notice for him, the man said. From the Red Willow County Bank. Her stomach tightened. What kind of notice? The man handed it to her without ceremony. She read it standing in the doorway. It was a notice of accelerated repayment. Nathan's mortgage, which had been structured with a 15-year term, was being called in under a clause that allowed the bank to demand full repayment within 90 days if they determined the property was at risk of declining value. Her hands didn't shake. She made sure of that. Who authorized this? She said. The bank president, the man said. Mr. Holloway? Has Mr. Cole missed any payments? No, ma'am. Has he violated any term of the agreement? Not as such. Then what declining value are they citing? The man looked uncomfortable. I just deliver the notices, ma'am. She looked at the paper again. 90 days to pay off a 15-year mortgage. Nathan didn't have that money. She knew it from the ledgers. Nobody had that money sitting idle on a working ranch. Thank you, she said, her voice completely steady. I'll see that he receives it. She closed the door. Then she stood in the entry for exactly 30 seconds and let herself feel the full weight of what she was holding. Edward Hayes had stopped waiting. Nathan read the notice at the kitchen table. He read it twice. Clara watched his jaw tighten, watched the particular controlled stillness of a man keeping his reaction on a very short leash. When he finished, he set it down. 90 days, he said. Yes. I can't pay off the mortgage in 90 days. I know. If I can't pay... He buys the note, Clara said. At auction, for less than it's worth, and then he owns the land. Nathan looked at her. You already worked it out. I worked it out before I brought it to the barn, she said. I needed to understand it before I told you. He stood up, walked to the window, stood there with his back to her and his hands at his sides. 6 years, he said. I built this place back up for 6 years after... He stopped. After everything. I know, Clara said. He's not going to get it. No, she agreed. He's not. Nathan turned around. What are we going to do? Clara noticed the we. She didn't comment on it, but she noticed it. First, I need to understand the bank's authority to invoke that clause, she said. The notice mentions declining value. That's subjective. If we can demonstrate the property value is stable or increasing documented in writing by someone credible, they lose their justification. Who would? The county assessor, she said. Records are public. Has the assessment on your land changed recently? Nathan frowned. They sent a reassessment notice about 2 months ago. I thought it was routine. Did you respond to it? I signed the form they sent. They lowered my assessed value. Clara closed her eyes briefly, opened them. They manufactured the declining value, she said. Someone Edwards or someone working for him arranged for a downward reassessment. Then they used that reassessment to justify the acceleration clause. She tapped her fingers on the table. It's tidy. It's legal on the surface. And it was set up months before he ever approached you the second time. Nathan stared at her. He planned this, he said. All of it. He's been planning it for at least 6 months, Clara said. Possibly longer. The kitchen was very quiet. Can it be undone? I don't know yet, she said honestly. But I know who I need to talk to. She went to see the county assessor herself the next morning. His name was Mr. Albright, a cautious paper-shuffling man, who looked at Clara with the expression people wore when they were trying to decide whether she was a problem or a distraction. I need to understand the basis for the reassessment of Nathan Cole's property, she said, sitting across from his desk with her hands folded and her voice entirely pleasant. Assessments are routine. This one wasn't, she said. The assessed value was reduced by nearly 1/3 in a single reassessment cycle. That doesn't happen without cause. I'd like to understand the cause. Albright shuffled papers. There were concerns about the profitability of the operation, he said. Reports suggested the ranch was underperforming relative to comparable properties. What reports? He shuffled more papers. I don't have the specific source in front of me. Mr. Albright. Clara leaned forward slightly. Someone told you Nathan Cole's ranch was underperforming. I'd like to know who. Because I have documentation 3 months of supply costs, livestock records, pasture assessments, and income projections that demonstrates the property is not only performing comparably to similar operations in this county, but improving. She set her ledger copy on his desk. And I am prepared to challenge the reassessment on that basis. He looked at the ledger copy. He looked at her. Who are you exactly? He said. I'm the person keeping the accounts, Clara said. And I'm very good at it. She didn't win that meeting. She didn't expect to not on the first round. But she watched Albright's face when he looked at her documentation, and she saw something flicker there that was more useful than agreement. Doubt. He wasn't certain anymore that he was standing on solid ground. And a man who wasn't certain didn't commit further. He stalled. He delayed. He waited to see which direction the wind was blowing before he leaned into it, which meant they had more time than the 90-day notice suggested. She drove the wagon home with her mind moving through the problem like water finding cracks. The county assessor was a tool, not the mechanism. The bank president Holloway was closer to the mechanism. And Edward Hayes was the one turning the handle. To fight Hayes directly, she needed to understand the full scope of what he was doing. Not just with Nathan's land, with all of it. The pattern of purchases, the names he was using, the timing. She needed to talk to someone who knew the county, not the powerful people. The powerful people were either working for Hayes or afraid of him. She needed to talk to the people who moved underneath. Mrs. Garrity came to mind. Clara had dismissed her on the first visit as a gossip, but gossip, she now understood, was just information moving through unofficial channels. And unofficial channels were often the only ones that told the truth. She stopped at the feed store on her way back through town. Mrs. Garrity was behind the counter. "Miss Bennett," she said, clearly surprised. "Mrs. Garrity," Clara said. "I owe you an apology for the last time. I wasn't very warm." The woman blinked. "Oh, no, You were trying to be neighborly, and I was defending myself by instinct." Clara set her gloves on the counter. "Could I ask you something honestly?" Mrs. Garrity looked at her with the wariness of someone being handed something they weren't sure was safe. "I suppose." "How many properties has Edward Hayes acquired in this county in the last 2 years?" A long pause. Mrs. Garrity looked at the door, then back at Clara. "That's not the sort of question most people ask directly," she said. "I'm not most people." Another pause. "7, Mrs. Garrity said quietly. "That we know of. 2 of them were through a land company out of Helena. Different name, but the money traces back to him if you know what to look for." She lowered her voice. "The Hendersons lost their place last spring. Mortgage called in suddenly. By fall, Hayes's land company owned it." She looked at Clara. "Is Nathan in trouble?" "He will be if we don't move quickly," Clara said. "Can you tell me about the Hendersons who handled their mortgage? What exactly happened?" Mrs. Garrity glanced at the door again. Then she reached under the counter and pulled out her stool. "Sit down," she said. "This is going to take a few minutes." She had 6 more pages of notes by the time she left the feed store. The pattern was exactly what she'd suspected, and worse. Hayes wasn't just acquiring land. He was doing it systematically, using the same mechanism each time: manufactured reassessments to devalue properties, followed by accelerated mortgage calls, followed by distress sales or forced auctions where Hayes's land company was always conveniently positioned to buy. The Hendersons weren't the only ones. There were at least 3 other families who had lost property under nearly identical circumstances in the past 18 months. Clara drove home faster than she usually did. Nathan was waiting on the porch. "How'd it go with Albright?" "I planted a seed," she said, climbing down from the wagon. "He's not certain anymore, which means he'll stall before he does anything further. But Nathan, we have a bigger problem." She told him everything. The Henderson farm, the other properties, the land company out of Helena. Nathan listened without interrupting. When she finished, the line of his jaw was very hard. "He's been running this scheme for 2 years, Nathan said. At least. And nobody stopped him. Nobody connected it," Clara said. "Each family saw their own problem in isolation. Nobody put it together as a pattern." She looked at him. "We can?" Nathan turned to look at her. "Clara," he said, "why are you doing this?" She blinked. "What do you mean?" "This isn't your fight," he said. "You arrived here with a suitcase and $3.40. You owed this place nothing. You owed me nothing." He looked at her directly. "You could have taken your wages, saved enough for a ticket, and gone. Why are you—" "Because he used me," Clara said. The words came out harder than she intended. "He put me in those letters. He made me part of his plan without my knowledge or consent. He treated me like a prop in something that had nothing to do with me." She held Nathan's gaze. "And I don't let that go." Nathan was very still. "Also," she said, slightly quieter, "this is the first place I felt like I was doing something that mattered in 4 years. So." The corner of Nathan's mouth moved. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met," he said. But his voice had something in it that wasn't a complaint. "I prefer thorough," she said. "Can we go inside? I have more notes to write up before I lose the order of it." Nathan held the door. And as she walked past him into the house that was slowly becoming something she recognized, She heard him say very quietly, almost to himself, 6 years since I had someone to fight beside. She didn't respond, but she heard it, and it settled somewhere in her chest, like something she hadn't known she was waiting for. 2 days later, she wrote the first letter. It went to the Henderson family who had moved to a smaller property south of town. She introduced herself, explained what she had learned, and asked if they would be willing to speak with her about what had happened to their mortgage. The second letter went to the County Land Records Office in Helena, requesting a search on acquisitions by 4 different company names that Mrs. Garrity had mentioned. The third letter she wrote and did not send. It was addressed to Edward Hayes. She wrote it long and precisely and with complete clarity about what she knew and what she intended to do with it. Then she folded it and put it in the back of her notebook. Not yet. Information was only power if you used it at the right moment. She was still gathering. Nathan found her in the kitchen late that night, long after supper, still working by lamplight. He stood in the doorway in his shirt and braces, clearly having gotten up rather than still being awake. "How long have you been at that?" he said. "A while," she said without looking up. "Go back to sleep." "Clara." She looked up. "You've been at this table for 6 hours," he said. "I'm close to having a complete picture of the property transactions." "It can wait until morning." "It could," she agreed. "But I won't sleep anyway." He crossed the room and pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He didn't ask to see the papers. He just sat, present, awake with her. She looked at him. "You don't have to stay up," she said. "I know," he said. She looked back at her papers. They sat in the quiet for a while. The lamp burned between them. Outside, the November wind moved against the house. "Nathan," she said eventually. When this is over, when we've dealt with Hayes, what do you want the ranch to be?" He was quiet for a moment. "I used to know the answer to that," he said, "before. And now?" He looked at the lamp. "Lately," he said carefully, "it's been feeling like a place worth having again." Clara didn't look up from her papers, but something in her chest went quiet and warm in the way that mattered. "Good," she said. "Then we'd better make sure you keep it." And she kept writing. The Henderson family wrote back in 4 days. Clara had half expected silence. People who'd been burned once didn't always want to walk back into the fire just to explain how it felt. But Ruth Henderson's letter arrived on a Thursday morning, 2 pages in tight, careful handwriting, and Clara read it standing at the table before she'd even taken off her coat. Ruth Henderson was angry. Not the defeated kind of angry that folds itself into acceptance. The awake kind. The kind that had been sitting in a drawer for 6 months, waiting for somewhere to go. She described everything. The assessor's visit. The bank notice that followed 3 weeks later. The way Holloway at the bank had been sympathetic but firm. "Nothing I can do, ma'am. The clause is clear. The law is the law." The way her husband had gone to Edward Hayes to ask for more time, and Hayes had expressed deep personal regret while offering to take the property off their hands for 60 cents on the dollar. The way they'd had no choice. At the bottom of the letter, Ruth had written, "If you are truly trying to stop this man, I will tell you everything I know. And I will bring my neighbor, Margaret Price, because the same thing happened to her 6 months before it happened to us." Clara set the letter down. "Nathan," she called toward the barn. He appeared in the doorway a minute later, wiping his hands on a rag. He read her face before she said a word. "What happened?" "We have witnesses," she said. The meeting happened on a Saturday at the feed store after closing time. Mrs. Garrity had offered the space without being asked, simply unlocked the back room and said, "I'll make coffee," with the efficient decisiveness of a woman who had been waiting for an opportunity to be useful. Ruth Henderson was a tall woman in her 50s, with gray-streaked hair and the posture of someone who had spent decades refusing to be diminished by hard circumstances. She sat across from Clara with her hands flat on the table and her eyes sharp. Her neighbor Margaret Price was smaller and quieter, but when she spoke, she was precise. the kind of precision that came from having rehearsed the details so many times in her own head that they had worn grooves. Nathan sat at the end of the table and mostly listened. Clara laid out what she had: the transaction record she'd requested from Helena, the pattern of reassessments, the timeline that connected each property acquisition to the same sequence of events: downward assessment bank notice, distress sale, Hayes Company acquisition. When she finished, Ruth Henderson looked at her for a long moment. "You've been here 2 months," she said. "Almost," Clara said. "And you put all this together in 2 months?" "The information was there," Clara said. "Nobody had looked at it all in one place." Ruth looked at Nathan. Where did she come from? "Train station," Nathan said, and the ghost of something moved across his face. Ruth turned back to Clara. "What do you need from us?" "Written statements," Clara said. "Detailed. Dates, names, exact words where you can remember them, especially anything Holloway said at the bank and anything Hayes said when he made his offer." She paused. "And I need to know if there's anyone else. Other families. People who sold under pressure and didn't understand why." Margaret Price said, "The Carmody brothers, north of the Miller Road." Ruth said, "And old Tom Waverly. He didn't lose his property he sold before the notice came, but I always thought someone had frightened him into it." Clara wrote all of it down. "There's something else," Ruth said. She reached into the bag she'd brought and took out a folded paper. "When Hayes made his offer for our property, he had documents ready, already drawn up, like he knew we'd say yes before we said it." She set the paper on the table. "I kept a copy of the offer. I don't know if it helps." Clara unfolded it. She read it carefully. Then she read it again. The offer was from a company called Clearwater Land Holdings. But at the bottom in the signature block, a notary stamp from Helena, and the notary's name was a man named Aldous Cross, who appeared in 2 of the other documents she'd received from the Land Records Office. The same notary. Every time. "This helps," Clara said quietly. "This helps a great deal." She didn't sleep that night. Not because she was anxious. The anxiety had transformed into something cleaner and more focused a week ago, and she'd stopped confusing the two. She didn't sleep because her mind wouldn't stop moving through the pieces, arranging and rearranging them, looking for the sequence that would hold up not just in her own reasoning, but in front of someone with authority to act on it. The problem wasn't the evidence. The evidence was there. It was accumulating faster than she'd expected. The problem was the mechanism. She could document everything Hayes had done, and it would mean nothing if the only people she could present it to were already in his pocket. Albright at the assessor's office was wavering, but wavering wasn't action. Holloway at the bank was almost certainly operating under Hayes's influence. The county sheriff she'd asked Mrs. Garrity about him was a man named Briggs, who had held his position for 12 years and whose re-election each cycle was quietly funded by the county's most prominent landowners. She needed someone with jurisdiction and independence. She needed a lawyer. She got up before dawn and wrote another letter. This one went to a man named Elias Marsh, an attorney in Billings, whose name she'd found in the Helena land records as the opposing counsel in a disputed property case from 3 years ago. The case had involved a similar scheme, inflated debt claims used to force a sale, and Marsh had won. She wrote clearly. She stated the facts without embellishment. She attached a summary of the documented transactions and the timeline. She asked for a consultation. Then she sealed it, addressed it, and set it by the door to go out with the Morning Post. She went back to the table and looked at the ledger. And for the first time since this had started, she felt something like confidence, not certainty. Confidence was different from certainty. Certainty was fragile. It shattered when facts changed. Confidence was structural. It came from knowing the quality of your own work. She knew the quality of her work. Nathan found the letter by the door when he came in for breakfast. He read the address on the envelope and looked at her. "Elias Marsh," he said. "In Billings." "He beat a similar case 3 years ago," Clara said. If anyone knows how to challenge what Hayes is doing through legal channels, it's him. Nathan set the letter down. Clara, an attorney in Billings, is going to cost— I know what it's going to cost, she said. Let me worry about that part. You're not paying for my legal defense out of your— Nathan. She looked at him directly. You gave me a room and wages and didn't ask anything in return when I had absolutely nothing. Let me do this. He opened his mouth. Please, she added. Quieter. He closed it. He looked at the letter for a moment. All right, he said. Then he sat down and ate his breakfast, and they talked about the north fence repair that needed doing before the next freeze, and neither of them mentioned the letter again. But when Clara went to hang her coat, she noticed Nathan had already put the letter in his vest pocket to take into town. 3 days after the letter went out, Edward Hayes came to the ranch. Not to the door. He stopped at the fence line at the edge of the property and waited there until Nathan appeared, which Hayes would have known he would. Nathan checked the fence line every morning without exception. Clara watched from the window. She couldn't hear what was said. She watched the body language instead. Hayes talking with the easy posture of a man who believed himself to be in control of the situation. Nathan standing very still in the way he did when he was keeping himself carefully managed. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes. Then Hayes rode away. Nathan came inside. He knows about the letters, Nathan said. He sat down at the table. His voice was completely steady. Which letters? The Henderson woman. He said she was a dissatisfied seller looking to blame someone for her own poor decisions. He said if I was encouraging that kind of talk, I should understand it opened me up to a defamation claim. Clara stared at him. He threatened you with defamation. He was very polite about it. He's always very polite about it. She pressed her fingers against the table. He knows we're building a case. That's why he came. He also said— Nathan paused. He looked at his hands. He said you weren't who I thought you were, that you'd been dismissed from the boarding house in Cheyenne for theft, that I should check your references before I trusted you with the property accounts. The room went very quiet. Clara felt the cold drop of it. Not surprised, not quite, because she should have expected this, but the particular indignity of hearing it said out loud. That even here, even after everything, someone felt entitled to reach into her past and manufacture rot. Is that what he said? She said. Yes. Nathan looked at her steadily. I told him I'd sooner trust Clara Bennett's handshake than his signed contract. She looked at him. You didn't ask me if it was true, she said. No, Nathan said simply. I didn't. Something in her chest cracked open in the quietest possible way. Nathan. Are we going to let him redirect us? He said. Or are we going to keep working? She breathed. We keep working, she said. Good. He stood up. I've got fencing to finish. He went back outside, and Clara sat at the table for a moment with her hand flat against the ledger and let the feeling move through her. Not gratitude exactly, but something older and more necessary. The feeling of being believed, of having someone look at the accusation and look at you and choose without hesitation. She hadn't known how much she needed that until it happened. She picked up her pen. She kept working. Elias Marsh's reply arrived 11 days later. He had read her summary. He had independently pulled the county land records for Red Willow on the strength of her documentation. He believed there was a case. He was available for a consultation on the 20th and would make the trip from Billings himself if she could arrange meetings with the affected parties. He charged $30 for a full case consultation plus expenses. He would waive the fee entirely if they proceeded to litigation and won. Clara read the letter twice. Then she walked out to the barn. Marsh is coming, she said. Nathan looked up from the harness he was repairing. Always harnesses she'd noticed when he was thinking. When? The 20th. He's willing to come here. She handed him the letter. He thinks there's a case. Nathan read it. His expression was hard to read, which she'd learned meant he was managing a stronger reaction than he wanted to show. A real attorney, he said, in the county. With Hayes's full transaction history and statements from 3 affected families, Clara said. It's not a sure thing, but it's real. Nathan set the letter down. He was quiet for a long moment. 6 years, he said. I've been here 6 years. This place, my wife loved this land. She used to say it felt like it had always been waiting for her. He stopped. I can't lose it to a man who wants it for a railroad profit. You're not going to, Clara said. You don't know that. No, she agreed. But I know we have better evidence than he expected, and a lawyer who's beaten this kind of scheme before, and 3 families who are angry enough to testify. She looked at him. And I know that Edward Hayes built this whole plan on the assumption that the people in his way would each feel alone. We're not alone. Nathan looked at her. It was the kind of look that lasted a moment too long to be casual. No, he said quietly. We're not. The town meeting changed things. It hadn't been planned as a town meeting exactly. Elias Marsh arrived on the 20th, a compact man in his late 40s with quick eyes and the unhurried manner of someone who had learned that patience was more effective than urgency in front of witnesses. He met with Clara and Nathan, first reviewed everything she had assembled, and said, "This is exceptional preparation, Miss Bennett. I don't often receive documentation this organized." The evidence was there, she said. I just arranged it. You did more than arrange it, he said. You connected it. That's the harder part. Then he met with Ruth Henderson and Margaret Price and the Carmody brothers, and eventually Tom Waverly, who turned out to be a wiry 70-year-old man who had been furious about what happened to him and needed only the smallest encouragement to say so in very specific terms. By the end of the second day, Marsh told them he was prepared to file. What we have, he said, sitting at Nathan's kitchen table with papers spread in front of him, is a documented pattern of fraudulent property devaluation for the purpose of triggering mortgage acceleration combined with evidence of coordinated purchasing through concealed entities. That's fraud. It's potentially criminal fraud in addition to the civil claims. How long will it take? Nathan asked. To get an injunction against the acceleration on your mortgage a few weeks if the judge is efficient. To try the full case months, possibly longer. Marsh looked at them both. But Hayes will know the moment I file that the scheme is exposed. Men like Hayes don't like exposure. There's a reasonable chance he settles before trial. Or he fights, Clara said. Or he fights, Marsh agreed. Which is why the documentation matters. He can threaten and maneuver, but he can't make the paper disappear. That night, word got through town in the way that things got through small towns, not through announcement, but through the particular osmosis of a community that was always paying attention, even when it pretended otherwise. By morning, people knew that a Billings attorney had been at the Cole Ranch, that witnesses had gathered, that someone was finally doing something about Edward Hayes. The feed store had 3 extra customers that day who didn't need feed. Mrs. Garrity reported with visible satisfaction that 2 people had asked her for Clara Bennett's name. Hayes moved faster than they expected. 4 days after Marsh's visit, Holloway at the bank sent a second notice. This one didn't extend the timeline, it shortened it. 60 days instead of 90. A clerical correction to the original notice, the letter said, which was almost artful in its contemptibility. Nathan read it at the breakfast table and said nothing for a full minute. Then he said, "He's panicking." Clara looked up. "Is that what this is?" "Panicked men accelerate," Nathan said. "Confident men are patient." He set the notice down. He knows Marsh is involved. He knows about the witnesses. He's trying to force a resolution before we have time to file. Clara stared at him. "When did you become a strategist?" she said. "I've been thinking," Nathan said, "about how men like Hayes operate. They're only as powerful as the gap between what they're doing and what other people know." He looked at her. "You've been closing that gap for 2 months. He feels it." She looked at him for a moment. "We need to move the filing date up," she said. "I'll write to Marsh today." "Already decided," Nathan said. I'm riding to the telegraph office this morning. She nodded, and then because the moment seemed to call for something more than efficiency, she said, Nathan, you understand that when this goes public, when Marsh files and it becomes official, Hayes is going to come at you harder. At both of us. I know, he said. He'll use everything, your finances, your history, anything that makes you look unstable or unreliable. Let him. Your reputation in this county, Clara. He looked at her steadily. My reputation in this county is either worth something or it isn't. If the truth doesn't protect it, I don't want the version that survives without the truth. She held his gaze. All right, she said. Come with me to the telegraph office, he said. There's something else I want to show you in town. She put on her coat. The something else turned out to be the building next to the dry goods store. It was empty, had been for a year according to Nathan, since the previous tenant moved to Billings. 2 rooms on the ground floor, a storage area in the back, a front window that looked out onto the main road. What is this? Clara said. I've been thinking about what you said, Nathan said. About women who arrive with nowhere to go. He looked at the building. About what you would have needed not someone to rescue you, but somewhere to land that wasn't charity. Somewhere you could work while you figured out your next step. Clara looked at him. You're talking about an office, he said. Accounts, records, correspondence services. Things women who arrive in this town often need done and can't pay a formal firm to handle. He paused. Things you're already good at. She stared at the building. Nathan, I can't afford to. The rent is low, he said. Lower than you'd expect. I know the landlord. Who is the landlord? He was quiet for a moment. I bought the building last year, he said. Thought I might use it for something. Didn't know what. Clara turned and looked at him. You bought a building and didn't know what for? I had a feeling, he said with the kind of uncomfortable shrug that a man made when he didn't want to examine his own instincts too closely. She looked at the building again. Something moved in her chest that had nothing to do with the legal case, and nothing to do with Edward Hayes, and everything to do with the fact that in her entire life, not one single person had ever looked at her and thought she might need a place to grow and then quietly built one. I'd need clients, she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. You have 3 families who just watched you build a legal case from scratch, Nathan said, and a town that's been paying attention. He looked at her. Word travels, Clara. You know that. She did know that. She stood in front of that empty building and felt the future rearranging itself into a shape she hadn't known she was allowed to want. This doesn't mean I'm staying indefinitely, she said. It doesn't mean anything except what you decide it means, Nathan said. I just wanted you to know the option existed. She looked at him for a long moment. Why? She said. Why do you keep doing this? He looked back at her. Because you walked into my ranch 3 months ago with $3.40 and the spine of someone who had no idea they'd already survived the worst thing, he said. And I've watched you build something out of nothing every single day since. He looked away. Because someone should have given you an option before now, and I have one to give. Clara pressed her lips together. She looked at the building. Show me the inside, she said. The filing happened on the first day of December. Marsh telegraphed the confirmation at noon. Clara received it at the telegraph office and carried it back to the ranch in her coat pocket, and when she walked through the door and held it up, Nathan read it without a word, and then exhaled very slowly, the exhale of a man who had been holding something for a long time. They had one evening of feeling like they'd won something before Hayes responded. The next morning, Clara walked into the dry goods store, and Mrs. Garrity met her at the door with an expression that stopped her cold. There's talk, Mrs. Garrity said low and fast. Hayes is telling people he's telling everyone who'll listen that you manipulated Nathan, that you came here with nothing and inserted yourself into his affairs for financial gain, that the whole case is manufactured by a woman who seduced a grieving widower into doing her dirty work. Clara stood very still. Is he? Half the town heard it by last night, Mrs. Garrity said. He's clever about it. He doesn't say it directly, you understand. He just tells people he's worried about Nathan. That Nathan has been lonely for so long. That a pretty young woman who had nowhere to go might take advantage of a good man's kindness. The full weight of it settled over her. Every ledger page, every letter, every hour at the kitchen table building the case piece by piece. And Hayes's answer was to turn her into a seductress, because it was easier than answering the evidence. Because it changed the question from what did Edward Hayes do to who is Clara Bennett? And because in 1887, in a frontier county, that question could undo everything. She felt the anger move through her like cold water, clean and clarifying. "Thank you for telling me," she said to Mrs. Garrity. She walked out of the store. She walked directly to the center of town, and she asked the first person she saw to please tell people that Clara Bennett would be at the community hall at 4 o'clock if anyone wanted to hear her speak. 31 people came. She hadn't expected that many. She had hoped for 15 and steeled herself for 7. 31 people stood in the community hall at 4 o'clock on a December afternoon, and Clara Bennett walked to the front of the room with her ledger under one arm and her notes in her hand, and the full knowledge that what she was about to do could not be undone. She had not told Nathan she was doing this. She had not told Marsh. She had simply walked into that hall and started talking. She told them about the night she arrived at the train station. She told them about Nathan's kitchen and the locked room and the coffee that was the one thing he'd gotten right. She told them about the ledgers and the east pasture and the Hendersons and the pattern that had been hiding in plain sight for 2 years. She told them about the accelerated mortgage notice, the manufactured reassessment, the land company out of Helena. She told them every relevant fact in the precise documented order she had spent 2 months establishing, and she told it the way she told everything, without flinching and without decoration. And then she said, "Edward Hayes is calling me a manipulator. He's calling me a woman who used a lonely man's grief to advance her own interests. He's saying these things because the alternative is answering the evidence, and he cannot answer the evidence." The hall was very quiet. "I came to this county with nothing," she said. "I came because a man promised me a future and then decided I didn't matter. And the first person who treated me like I did, like I was worth a room and a fair wage and basic human decency, was Nathan Cole, who is now the target of the same kind of man who used me to try to damage him in the first place." She set her ledger on the table beside her. "I am not here to ask you to like me," she said. "I'm here to show you the record. Every transaction, every date, every name. Because this happened to the Hendersons and the Prices and the Carmodys and Tom Waverly. And if it isn't stopped, it will happen to someone else in this room." She looked out at 31 faces. Some of them were closed. Some of them were uncertain. But some of them were awake. "I don't need you to believe me because I'm sympathetic," she said. "I need you to look at the paper. That's all. Just look at the paper." She opened the ledger, and she started reading. Nathan found out about it at 6 o'clock when Ruth Henderson rode out to the ranch to tell him. He stood in the barn doorway and listened to Ruth describe what had happened, and his expression moved through several things in quick succession: alarm, something like awe, and then something that settled into a steady, determined warmth. "She did that alone," he said. "She walked in there alone and talked for 40 minutes, Ruth said. By the end, people were asking questions. Good questions. Not the kind Hayes wants people asking." Nathan looked toward the road. "Is she still in town?" "She was finishing up when I left." He was already untying his horse. He met her wagon on the road halfway between town and the ranch, and he pulled his horse up beside her in the last of the December light and looked at her face, flushed, tired, completely undimmed. "You went to the community hall," he said. "He was going to let the story set overnight," she said. "I couldn't let the story set." "You should have told me. You would have tried to talk me out of it." "I would have come with you," he said. Clara looked at him. In the cold evening air, with the mountains dark behind them and the wagon horse impatient under her hands, she looked at Nathan Cole and felt something she had spent months being careful not to name. "I needed to do it myself," she said. "You understand that." He held her gaze. "Yes," he said quietly. "I understand that exactly." They rode back to the ranch together in the falling dark, and neither of them spoke, but the silence between them had changed into something neither of them was quite ready to say out loud. But both of them felt it, clear as the cold, solid as the ground under them. And for the first time since she'd arrived in Red Willow County, with a worn leather suitcase and nowhere to go, Clara Bennett was not afraid of what came next. The morning after the community hall, the town felt different. Not loudly different. Not the kind of different you could point at and name. But Clara felt it the moment she drove the wagon into Red Willow, in the way people made eye contact, in the way two women outside the milliner's shop stopped their conversation and nodded at her with the particular deliberateness of people who had made a decision about something. Mrs. Garrity met her at the feed store door before she'd even tied off the horse. "Tom Waverly came in this morning," she said low and fast. "Said he wants to add to his statement. He remembered something about the assessor's visit, a name Hayes's man used that he didn't think was important at the time. Turns out it's the same name in two of your Helena documents." Clara stopped. "Which name?" "Cross. Aldous Cross. The notary. The same notary stamp on every Hayes Company document. The thread she'd been pulling at for weeks, and now it had pulled back. "Tell him to write it down," Clara said. "Everything he remembers. Exactly as he remembers it. I'll come by this afternoon." She went straight to the telegraph office and sent word to Marsh in Billings. The reply came back within 2 hours. Cross is licensed. If he notarized fraudulent documents, that's criminal exposure for Hayes directly. "Excellent. Don't let Waverly talk to anyone else until I arrive." Clara folded the telegram and put it in her coat. She stood on the boardwalk for a moment in the cold December air and let herself feel the precise weight of what was happening. They had him. Not completely. Not yet. But the shape of it was clear. Now Hayes had been careful, but not careful enough. He had used the same notary across every transaction because convenience had outweighed caution, and that single point of connection ran through everything like a seam. She walked back to the wagon. She had work to do. Nathan was at the north fence when she got back, hammering in posts with the focused rhythm of a man who used physical work to manage things he couldn't yet put into words. She told him about Cross, about Marsh's reply, about what it meant. He stopped hammering. He looked at the post. Then he looked at her. "It's almost over," he said. "Almost," she said. "Not yet. Hayes will move when he hears about Cross. We have to be ready for whatever that looks like." "What do you think it looks like?" "I think," Clara said carefully, "that it looks like a man who has very little left to lose making one large and poorly considered decision." Nathan looked at her. "You think he'll come here?" "I think he'll try something direct," she said. "He's been operating through layers, the assessor, the bank, the land company. Each layer gave him distance. Now the layers are coming off." She met Nathan's eyes. Men who are used to distance don't handle closeness well. Nathan turned back to the fence post. He set the hammer down. "I want you to stay close to the ranch for the next few days," he said. Clara raised an eyebrow. "That's not a request I'm going to honor," she said. "Clara, I have 3 more witness interviews before Marsh arrives, and I can't do them from your kitchen," she said. "I'll be careful, but I won't hide." Nathan looked at the sky, the particular look of a man renegotiating with his own anxiety. "All right," he said. "But you take the main road, no back routes." "Agreed," she said. "And you tell me where you're going before you go." "That I'll do anyway," she said. "I've been doing that already." He looked at her. "I know," he said. "I noticed." He picked up the hammer. She went inside, and neither of them acknowledged the fact that they had just negotiated the terms of something that had stopped being purely professional quite some time ago. Marsh arrived on December 8th. He came with a leather case full of filed documents and the air of a man who had slept on the train and considered it adequate rest. He sat at Nathan's kitchen table, spread everything out, and went through it piece by piece with Clara beside him, while Nathan sat across from them and paid attention in the particular way he had absolute stillness, nothing missed. Waverly's testimony about Cross changes the shape of the case, Marsh said. Before we had a civil fraud claim, strong, well-documented but civil. Now we potentially have criminal conspiracy. Fraudulent notarization isn't a small matter. Cross could face disbarment and charges. And if Cross cooperates to reduce his own exposure, he gives us Hayes directly, Clara said. Exactly. Marsh looked at her. You anticipated this. It was the logical pressure point, she said. The chain was Hayes to the land company, to the bank, to the assessor. Cross was the connective tissue. If he breaks, the whole chain breaks, Marsh said. He leaned back. I have a colleague in Helena who knows Cross professionally. I'd like to make a quiet approach before we file the amended complaint. Give Cross the opportunity to understand his position before he learns about it in a courtroom. Nathan spoke for the first time in 20 minutes. And Hayes? Marsh looked at him. Hayes won't know about the Cross angle until we file. We file, he'll know within hours. After that, his options are to fight or to settle, given the criminal exposure the Cross connection creates. He paused. I'd expect a settlement offer within 2 weeks of filing. And the land he already took, Nathan said. The Hendersons, the Carmodys. That's in the complaint, Clara said, before Marsh could answer. All of it. Restitution for every family. Marsh looked at her. Miss Bennett, he said, when this is finished you should consider the law. She almost smiled. I'll consider it. The settlement offer didn't come in 2 weeks. It came in 4 days, which meant Hayes had known about Cross faster than they'd expected, which meant someone had told him someone close enough to the process to hear things they shouldn't. Clara filed that fact away without discussing it yet, because she didn't want to fracture the coalition they'd built with accusations she couldn't prove. The offer came through Holloway at the bank, delivered in a sealed envelope to Nathan's ranch by a rider who left before anyone could ask him questions. Nathan brought it inside without opening it and set it on the table in front of Clara, like a thing he didn't trust. You open it, he said. She did. She read it twice. Then she set it down and said, He's offering to withdraw the acceleration notice on your mortgage, terminate the pending assessment revision, and pay the Henderson and Price families 40% of their original property value. Nathan stared at her. 40%. 40%, she said. They lost their homes. Yes. And he's offering them 40 cents on the dollar. He's offering himself a way out that costs him as little as possible, Clara said. He thinks we'll take it because it resolves the immediate pressure on your mortgage and gives the families something. It's not enough, Nathan said. No, Clara said. It isn't. What do you think we should do? She looked at him steadily. I think we should send Marsh back a counter, she said. Full restitution for every affected family at assessed market value, not Hayes's discounted offer. Your mortgage terms restored to original with all legal fees covered. And a signed confession of the scheme filed with the county, so it's part of the public record. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. He'll refuse the confession, he said. Then we go to trial, Clara said simply. Nathan looked at the letter. He looked at her. You're not afraid of that, he said. It wasn't a question. I'm afraid of all kinds of things, she said honestly. But I'm more afraid of letting him pay 40 cents on the dollar and walk away and do this again somewhere else. Nathan nodded slowly. Write the counter, he said. She already had the pen in her hand. Hayes's response to the counter came in person. Not to the ranch this time. He found Nathan at the hardware store in town on a Tuesday morning, and he found him alone because Clara had gone to meet with Ruth Henderson, and nobody had planned for Hayes to be in that particular store at that particular moment. Nathan told her about it that evening. He told it plainly, the way he told everything. No dramatizing, no editorializing, just the sequence of what happened. Hayes had been pleasant at first, commiserating, man to man. He'd said he understood Nathan was in a difficult position, that a clever woman had gotten her hooks into a lonely man's goodwill, that these things happened, and there was no shame in recognizing when you'd been played. Nathan had listened without responding. Then Hayes had said, "The offer I made is the best you'll see. Marsh is good, but he's not a miracle. And a trial in this county goes in front of a judge I've known for 15 years. Nathan had said, "Then we'll see what 15 years of friendship is worth against documented fraud." Hayes's pleasantness had stopped. "You're making an enemy," he'd said. And Nathan had said, "You made yourself my enemy 2 years ago when you started squeezing this county. I just didn't know it yet." Clara listened to all of this. When Nathan finished, she said, "He mentioned the judge." "Yes." "By implication or directly?" "By implication, but clearly." She pressed her fingers together. "We need to know who the judge is," she said, "and whether there's a basis to request a change of venue." Nathan looked at her. "You think Hayes can fix a trial? I think a man who has been operating in this county for 2 years through unofficial channels has spent 2 years building unofficial relationships," she said. "I think we shouldn't assume the courtroom is neutral." She paused. "I'll write to Marsh tonight." "Clara." Nathan's voice had changed. She looked up. "This is getting bigger than either of us planned." "Yes," she agreed. "Are you—" He stopped, started again. "Is this still something you want to be part of?" She looked at him for a long moment. "You're asking if I want to step back," she said. "I'm asking if it's gotten to be too much," he said carefully. "You came here with nothing and somehow ended up in the middle of a legal battle that isn't your fight." "We established 2 months ago that it is my fight," she said. 2 months ago, Hayes hadn't implied he had a judge in his pocket. "Nathan." She put her pen down. "Look at me." He looked at her. "I am not leaving," she said. "I am not stepping back. I am not frightened off by a man implying things in a hardware store." She held his gaze. "And I need you to stop asking me if I'm sure, because every time you ask it sounds like you're giving me permission to go. And I don't need your permission. I need your trust." The kitchen was very quiet. Nathan's jaw worked for a moment. "You have it," he said. "You've had it for a while." "Good," she said, and picked up the pen. He sat down across from her and didn't say anything else. But he stayed at the table. And that, she had learned, was Nathan Cole's way of saying everything he couldn't find the words for. Yeah. Marsh's response about the judge was not reassuring. The presiding judge for Red Willow County civil cases was a man named Harlan Pruitt, appointed 8 years prior. Marsh had pulled his record clean on the surface, but with a pattern of rulings in property disputes that consistently favored the county's larger landholders. Nothing provable. Nothing that would sustain a formal recusal motion on its own. But Marsh had also, through his Helena colleague, made contact with Aldous Cross. Cross had not been difficult to reach. Cross, it turned out, had been waiting for someone to reach him. He was a cautious man, the cautious kind who double-crossed only when he was certain, but he was also a man who had been watching Hayes's scheme expand for 2 years and had privately calculated that when it fell, as these things eventually fell, he wanted to be on the correct side of the documentation. He had kept copies. Not of everything, but of enough. Enough to show that Hayes had personally directed the fraudulent reassessment requests. Enough to show that Holloway at the bank had been operating under explicit instruction from Hayes, not independent judgment. Enough to show that the timing of each acquisition had been coordinated well in advance of the public-facing steps that triggered it. Marsh sent a summary by telegram. Clara read it to Nathan, standing at the kitchen table, with her hands steady, and her voice steady, and her heart moving faster than either of those things suggested. "He has written direction from Hayes," she said. "Personal correspondence. Hayes telling him what to stamp and when." Nathan stared at her. That's criminal," she said. "That's not civil fraud anymore. That's wire fraud and conspiracy. Marsh is filing the amended complaint tomorrow. He's also simultaneously filing a report with the Territorial Attorney General's office. The Territorial Attorney General. Above county level. Above Judge Pruitt. Above the 15-year friendship Hayes had implied in the hardware store. Nathan sat down slowly. "He's finished," Nathan said. "He's not finished until he is," Clara said. "But yes, this is different now." Nathan put his elbows on the table and his face in his hands, and for a moment he just sat there. Not crying. Nathan Cole was not as far as she'd ever witnessed a man who cried easily. But breathing. The long, careful breathing of a man allowing himself to feel something he'd been holding at arm's length for a very long time. Clara sat down across from him. She didn't say anything. She just waited. After a moment, Nathan raised his head. His eyes were clear. Something in his face had released, not gone soft, not weakened, but released. Like a thing that had been wound too tight for too long, finally allowed to find its natural tension. "My wife's name was Ellen," he said. Clara stilled. He had not spoken her name before. Not once in 3 months. She was funny, he said. That's the thing people forget about the people they lose. Not just that they were good or kind, but what made them specific. Ellen was funny. She had this way of finding the exact right thing to say to deflate a situation. He looked at his hands. After she died, I stopped being able to find anything funny. Like she took that with her. Clara kept very still. "I'm not telling you this because He stopped. Tried again. "I'm telling you this because this place, this ranch, it's been a monument for 6 years. Not a home. A monument to what I lost." He looked up. "And somewhere in the last 3 months, it started being a home again." The lamp between them burned quietly. "Nathan, I'm not saying this to complicate anything," he said quickly. "I know your situation is. I know you have your own plans and your own—" "Nathan," she said more firmly. He stopped. "I opened an account at the bank last week," she said, "under my own name. I've been putting aside what I'll need for the first month's rent on that building you showed me." She held his gaze. "I'm not going anywhere." He looked at her. "That's not the same as—" "I know what it's not the same as," she said. "I'm getting there. I just need you to stop talking for a moment." He closed his mouth. She looked at her hands on the table, then back at him. "I came here with $3.40 and no future that I could see," she said. "And you gave me a room with a lock on the door, and coffee, and the space to figure out what I was worth without anyone telling me." She paused. "I didn't know what I was worth when I arrived. I do now. And part of knowing that is understanding the difference between someone who helps you because they pity you and someone who helps you because they see something." Nathan said nothing. "You saw something," she said. "Before I did." The kitchen was very quiet. "What are you saying?" he said carefully. "I'm saying," Clara said, "that when this is finished, when Hayes is dealt with, and Marsh has filed everything, and the Hendersons have their restitution, I'd like to have a conversation about what comes next. A real one." She held his gaze. "If you want to." Nathan looked at her for a long moment. "I've wanted to have that conversation," he said slowly, "for about 2 months. "I know," she said. "I wasn't ready 2 months ago." "And now?" "Now I'm building something," she said. "And I'd like to know if you want to build it beside me instead of just near me." Nathan Cole, who was not a man of easy words, who had spent 6 years learning to live with silence, looked at Clara Bennett across the kitchen table in the lamplight and smiled. Not the ghost of a smile. Not the almost smile she'd been cataloging for months. A real one. "Yes," he said. "That's exactly what I want." Hayes made his last move on a Thursday. It came not through Holloway or through a writer or through polite implications in public spaces. It came through a man named Gil Rourke, who arrived at the ranch just after noon with 2 other men and a document he claimed was a county writ authorizing temporary seizure of the property, pending resolution of the mortgage dispute. Clara answered the door. She read the document in under 30 seconds. "This isn't a county writ," she said. Rourke blinked. "Ma'am, A county writ requires a judge's signature and a county seal, she said. This has a judge's signature, Pruitt, I assume, but the seal is incorrect. The Red Willow County seal has 13 stars. This has 11. She turned the document over. Also, the date on this document is November 30th, which is 4 days before Marsh filed the amended complaint with the Territorial Attorney General's office. A seizure writ issued after that filing would be automatically stayed pending federal review. She looked at Rourke. Either someone made a very sloppy forgery, or Hayes is panicking badly enough that he stopped checking his own work. Rourke looked at the document, then at his two companions, then back at Clara. I was told. I understand what you were told, Clara said. I'm telling you what I know. If you attempt to execute a forged writ on this property, you will be named personally in the criminal complaint that is already on file with the Territorial Attorney General. That's not a threat, it's a procedural fact. She held the document out. Take this back to whoever gave it to you, and tell them it didn't work. Rourke took the document. He looked at it for another moment, like he was hoping it would change. It didn't. He left. Nathan had come in from the south field while it was happening. He'd heard the last part from the doorway. When the three men rode away, he came inside and stood in the kitchen and looked at Clara with an expression she couldn't immediately name. You just turned away 3 men with a forged writ, he said. The forgery was careless, she said. Anyone who knew what to look for would have caught it. Most people don't know what to look for. Most people haven't spent 3 months reading county documents, she said. Nathan looked at the door where the men had gone. He's falling apart, he said. Yes, she said. Desperate men make careless mistakes. That writ is going to Marsh today. It's additional evidence of tampering with legal process. She paused. It's almost over, Nathan. He turned back to her, and then he crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and did something he had not done in 3 months of proximity and careful restraint. He took her hand, not dramatically, not as a gesture, just took it the way you took hold of something you'd been reaching for and finally allowed yourself to reach for. Clara looked down at their hands, then up at him. Almost over, he said quietly. And then a real conversation. And then a real conversation. She agreed. She didn't let go, and he didn't either. The Territorial Attorney General's office moved in the 3rd week of December. 2 investigators arrived from Helena on a Wednesday, and by Thursday morning, Holloway at the bank had given a full statement in exchange for reduced personal liability. By Friday, the Red Willow County Assessor's Office had been placed under administrative review. And on Saturday, quietly, without the kind of drama Hayes had always used as a weapon, Edward Hayes was served with a criminal complaint. Nathan heard about it from Marsh by telegram. He came into the kitchen where Clara was working on the accounts for the building office. She'd signed the lease 2 weeks prior and was already taking correspondence clients, and he read her the telegram without preamble. She listened. She set her pen down. She sat with it for a moment. The Hendersons, she said. And the others. Restitution is part of the complaint, Nathan said. Marsh says full market value, not Hayes's 40%. It'll take time to process through the court, but it's in there. Clara nodded slowly. She thought about Ruth Henderson's letter. The tight handwriting. If you are truly trying to stop this man. She thought about Mrs. Garrity and her stool and 6 pages of notes. She thought about Tom Waverly, 70 years old and furious and ready. She thought about a community hall on a December afternoon and 31 people and a ledger open on a table. We did it, she said. Quiet, like she was still checking whether it was real. You did it, Nathan said. She looked at him. We, she said firmly. Nathan sat down across from her. You came here 3 months ago, he said, and this place was losing money. I was losing the mortgage, and the man responsible for both things was operating completely unchallenged. He shook his head slowly. Because of you. Because of us, she said again. Nathan, I need you to understand this. I built the case, but you gave me the foundation. You gave me the room and the table and the time, and you believed me without evidence, and you stood beside me when Hayes tried to make me the story instead of the evidence." Her voice was even, direct, the way she was always direct with him. "That's not nothing. That's everything." He looked at her. "I've been alone for 6 years," he said, "and I got used to it. I convinced myself that alone was easier than—" He stopped. "Then losing someone again," she said. "Yes." "Is that still what you believe?" He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the December wind moved around the house. The lamp on the table burned steadily. The ranch was quiet, in the way it had become quiet in the last 3 months, not the hollow quiet of a place with too much space and not enough life, but the full quiet of somewhere that had things worth protecting. "No," Nathan said. "I stopped believing that somewhere around the 2nd week you were here. I just didn't want to say it out loud." "Why not?" "Because you had your own things to survive," he said, "and I didn't want to add to what you were carrying." Clara looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Nathan Cole, I have $3.40 and a lease on an office and a legal case that just ended in our favor. I am not carrying anything I can't manage." She paused. "What I'm saying is you don't have to protect me from your feelings. I can hold them." Nathan's jaw shifted. "That's the most Clara Bennett thing you've ever said," he said. "I'm aware," she said. "Now say what you want to say." He looked at her across the table, in the lamplight, in the house that had been a monument and was becoming a home. "I love you," he said, simple and direct, like a man who, having finally decided to say a true thing, saw no point in dressing it up. "I have for a while. I wasn't sure what to do with it." Clara looked at him. "Well," she said, "that's well-timed because I love you too. And I've been considerably more sure about what to do with it, and considerably less willing to say so out loud." Nathan stared at her. Then he laughed. Not the almost laugh, not the ghost of something lighter. A real one, full and warm and rusty from years of disuse, and absolutely the most genuine sound she had ever heard in that kitchen. "You've known for how long?" he said. "Longer than is dignified," she said. "I was waiting for the right moment. And this is it. Hayes is finished, your mortgage is safe, the Hendersons are getting their restitution, and I have a signed lease on my office," she said. "I'd say yes. This is it." Nathan reached across the table. He took her hand again, the same way he had a week ago, certain and unhurried. "Marry me," he said. Clara blinked. "That was fast." "I've been thinking about it for 2 months. We've known each other for 3 months." "I know," he said. "Is that a no?" She looked at him, at the certainty in his face, which was not the easy certainty of someone who hadn't considered the weight of it, but the deliberate certainty of someone who had considered it completely and arrived at a conviction. She thought about, with all my heart, and what it had meant when it was a lie. She thought about what it would mean if it were true. "It's not a no," she said. "It's a ask me again in the spring, when the iris bulbs come up." Nathan looked at her. "The ones I was going to pull," he said. "The ones you cleared the debris off of instead," she said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Spring," he said. "Spring," she confirmed. He didn't let go of her hand. And in that kitchen, in the lamplight, in the house that was no longer a monument to what had been lost, but a living thing reaching toward what was still possible, Nathan Cole and Clara Bennett sat together with the winter settling around them and the spring somewhere ahead, and neither of them was afraid of waiting. Winter in Montana did not release its grip easily. January came in hard and stayed hard, and the ranch demanded everything. The season always demanded. Frozen water lines, cattle that needed checking twice a day, a north fence that went down in a storm and had to be rebuilt with hands that went numb in under 10 minutes. Clara worked beside Nathan through all of it without being asked, without announcing herself, simply appearing where the work was and doing her share. That was something Nathan noticed and did not comment on. He didn't need to. The office in town was not yet open. The building needed work before it was usable in winter, and Clara had decided that a proper opening in January was better than a rushed one in December. So she ran the ranch accounts from the kitchen table and took 2 correspondence clients by arrangement, handling their letters and records from the same chair where she had spent 3 months building a legal case, and charged them a fair rate that was less than a formal firm and more than nothing, which was all they could have afforded anyway. Ruth Henderson stopped by on a Tuesday in mid-January. She came without announcement, which Clara had learned was Ruth's way. She arrived when she had something to say and trusted that the timing would sort itself out. Nathan was in the barn. Clara made coffee. Ruth sat down and wrapped both hands around her cup and said, "The territorial court issued the restitution order this morning." Clara set the coffee pot down. "Full value," she said. "Full assessed market value," Ruth said. "Every family. The Carmodys got a letter yesterday. Tom Waverly got his this morning." She paused. "My husband cried. He wouldn't want me to tell you that." "I won't tell anyone," Clara said. Ruth looked at her across the table. "You know what the strangest part is," Ruth said. "All those months after we lost the farm, I kept thinking, if only someone had seen what was happening before it happened. If only someone had connected it." She shook her head. "And then you arrived, 3 months ago, with a suitcase." "And $3.40, Clara said. Ruth almost smiled. "Is that true?" "Exactly $3.40, Clara said. "I counted it twice." Ruth was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do now?" she said. "With the case finished. With—" She glanced toward the barn. "Everything." Clara looked at her coffee. "Open the office in the spring," she said. "Build the practice. Take clients who need help with documents and records and correspondence people who can't afford a formal firm." She paused. "There are more people in this county who need that than there are people providing it." "And Nathan," Ruth said. Directly because that was also Ruth's way, Clara looked at her. "Spring," she said. Ruth looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded once with the decisive satisfaction of someone who had received exactly the answer they expected. "Good," she said, and picked up her coffee. Hayes's criminal trial was set for March. Marsh sent the scheduling notice with a 1-line telegram. Pruitt recused himself. New judge from Billings. Our ground. Clara read it to Nathan at breakfast. He set down his fork. "Pruitt recused himself," he said slowly. "Once the Territorial Attorney General's office got involved, a judge with a 15-year friendship with the defendant becomes a liability," Clara said. "Pruitt would have known that. Recusing himself was the smart move, protects his position on the bench. So Hayes loses his judge." "Hayes loses his judge," Clara confirmed. Nathan picked up his fork again. "And Cross, cooperating fully," Clara said, "in exchange for a reduced charge misdemeanor negligence rather than criminal conspiracy. He'll lose his notary license. But Marsh says his testimony is the spine of the prosecution case." She folded the telegram. "It's a strong position, Nathan. Do we have to testify?" "Marsh says possibly. He'll know more in February." Nathan nodded. "All right," he said, and went back to his breakfast with the equanimity of a man who had accepted that some things required patience, and that patience was a skill you built the same way you built any other, by practicing it, until it stopped feeling like waiting and started feeling like trust. Clara watched him. She thought about the man she'd seen on that platform 3 months ago, the careful distance, the coat placed beside her without a word. "Because someone helped me when I had nothing." She thought about how you could know everything relevant about a person and still be surprised by the depth of them. She was still being surprised. She folded the telegram and put it in the desk drawer and went back to the ledger. February brought something nobody had anticipated. It came in the form of a letter, not from Marsh, not from the court, not from anyone connected to Hayes. It came from a woman in Billings named Alice Dormer, who had read about the Red Willow County case in the territorial newspaper and written to Clara directly. Alice Dormer was a widow. Her husband had left her with a small property and a set of accounts she didn't understand, and a creditor who was telling her she owed more than the numbers she could find in the records suggested she did. She had read about Clara Bennett and wondered if she might be willing to take a look. Clara read the letter 3 times. Then she wrote back the same afternoon. She told Alice Dormer that she would be glad to review the accounts. She outlined her fee. She asked for copies of the relevant documents and told Alice she would have a response within 2 weeks. She sealed the letter and set it by the door and sat for a moment with her hand flat on the table. The office wasn't open yet, but the work had already begun. Nathan found her still sitting at the table when he came in from the evening check. "You look pleased," he said. "I have a client," she said, "in Billings." He looked at the letter by the door. "Before the office opens," he said. "Word travels," she said. "You told me that." "I did." He agreed. He hung his coat. "What's the case?" she told him. Nathan listened with the focused attention he gave. Everything, no interruptions, no half-formed responses while she was still talking. When she finished, he said, "Same pattern as Hayes." "Similar," she said. "Smaller scale. But the mechanism inflating what's owed, making the debtor feel like they're confused rather than deceived, it's the same instinct." She paused. "There are people doing this everywhere, Nathan. Not always as organized as Hayes. Sometimes just one person taking advantage of someone who doesn't have the tools to push back. And you're going to give them the tools," he said. "I'm going to try," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "You know, this is going to be bigger than one office in Red Willow," he said. "I know," she said. "One client at a time." Nathan crossed to the table and sat down. He didn't say anything else, but he reached across and moved the lamp closer to her papers so the light was better. And that small, practical, completely Nathan gesture landed somewhere in her chest with the weight of everything it meant. She kept working. He stayed. The Hayes trial opened on the 4th of March. Clara and Nathan rode to the courthouse in Billings together. They had been asked to testify. Marsh had confirmed it the previous week, and Clara had spent the preceding days reviewing her documentation one final time. Not because she doubted it, but because she wanted to walk into that room with every fact as current and precise as it had been the day she first committed it to paper. The courthouse in Billings was larger than anything Red Willow had. Nathan looked at the building and said nothing, but she felt the slight tension in him, the particular discomfort of a man who was confident in his own ground, and less so in formal ones. She walked beside him through the door. Marsh met them in the corridor, brisk and focused. "The cross testimony went in yesterday," he said. "Solid." Hayes's attorney tried to challenge his credibility on the basis of the misdemeanor plea, but the documentary evidence stands on its own, regardless of cross. He looked at Clara. "You're on this afternoon. Nathan, you're tomorrow morning." Clara nodded. "How is the judge reading it?" she said. "Carefully," Marsh said. "Which is what we want. Not sympathetically carefully. We have facts. Careful is better than sympathetic." She agreed. She took the stand at 2 o'clock. The courtroom was fuller than she'd expected. Word had spread the Red Willow case had been in the territorial papers, and the gallery held people she recognized and people she didn't, including Ruth Henderson in the second row, with her hands folded and her jaw set. Hayes was at the defendant's table. She looked at him when she sat down. He looked back at her. His expression was controlled, the easy pleasantness stripped away, now replaced by something more naked. Something that was almost, she thought, respect. The reluctant kind. The kind a man had for an opponent who had beaten him cleanly. Marsh led her through the testimony methodically. The arrival in Red Willow. The discovery of the financial situation at Nathan's ranch. The pattern she identified in the county land records. The Aldous Cross connection. The forged writ. Each piece in sequence, each documented, each presented with the same precision she had used when she opened the ledger in the community hall 3 months ago. Hayes's attorney was a good lawyer. He pushed on her background, the boarding house, the lack of formal accounting credentials, the fact that she had arrived in Red Willow under what he called unusual circumstances. "Miss Bennett," he said, "you arrived in Red Willow County as a result of a matrimonial correspondence with my client. Is that correct?" "It is," she said. "And you were disappointed when that arrangement didn't proceed." "I was deceived," she said. "There's a difference. And is it possible that your disappointment colored the conclusions you drew from the documents you reviewed?" Clara looked at him calmly. "The documents don't have feelings," she said. "They have dates and amounts and signatures. I reported what was in them." "But your interpretation—" "My interpretation is corroborated by the testimony of Aldous Cross, who notarized the documents personally, and by 3 affected families who experienced the identical sequence of events in the identical order." She paused. "If my interpretation is colored by disappointment, so is the arithmetic." A small sound moved through the gallery. The judge didn't suppress a smile. He covered it by looking at his notes. Hayes's attorney moved on. She stepped down from the stand at 4 o'clock. Marsh met her in the corridor. "That," he said, "was extraordinary." "The documentation was extraordinary," she said. "I just read it out loud." "You handled the cross-examination." "He was trying to make me the question instead of the evidence," she said. "I've dealt with that before." She paused. "How much longer does Hayes's attorney have?" "Closing arguments by Friday," Marsh said. "Verdict possibly next week." She nodded. Nathan was waiting at the end of the corridor. He had watched the testimony from the gallery. Marsh had arranged it so he could observe before his own turn on the stand. He looked at her as she walked toward him, and his expression was the one she had catalogued over 3 months of careful observation, the one that said more than he was ready to put into words. "Well," he said. "Well," she said. "You told a lawyer that the arithmetic wasn't disappointed." "He deserved it." Nathan almost smiled. "Are you all right?" he said. She considered the question honestly. "Yes," she said. "I think I actually am." He held the door. They walked out into the March air together. The verdict came on a Wednesday. Guilty on 7 counts. Fraud. Criminal conspiracy. Fraudulent notarization by proxy. Obstruction that one had been added when the forged writ came into evidence. 2 counts of coercion against the affected families. Holloway at the bank received a separate judgment, removed from his position, fined, his banking license suspended for 5 years. The restitution orders for all 5 affected families were confirmed and scheduled for enforcement within 60 days. Marsh telegraphed the result to Clara and Nathan, who were at the ranch when it arrived. Clara read it standing in the kitchen. Nathan was behind her, having come in from the barn when he heard the horse, and he read it over her shoulder. They stood together in the kitchen for a moment. Then Nathan said, "It's done." "It's done," she said. She folded the telegram. She was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of someone with nothing to say, but the quiet of someone letting something large settle into its proper place. "Nathan," she said. "The irises." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What about them?" She turned around. "You told me to ask you again in the spring," he said. "I said to ask me when the iris bulbs came up," she corrected. "Clara, they're up," she said. "I checked this morning, the south side of the house. There are 6 of them." Nathan stared at her. "You checked this morning?" "I've been checking every day for 3 weeks," she said. "I wanted to be accurate about the timing." He looked at her. Something moved in his face, that full, unguarded realness that she had spent months learning to recognize and had never once taken for granted. "Will you marry me?" he said. "Yes," she said. "I told you it wasn't a no. You made me wait until spring." "You needed the time," she said. "To be sure." "I was sure in December." "I know," she said. "But I needed to know you'd still feel it when the hard part was finished. When there was nothing left to fight and it was just us. The ranch. The office. the daily ordinary business of a life. She met his eyes. Some things only hold together under pressure. I needed to know this wasn't one of them. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. And now you know, he said. And now I know, she said. He crossed the kitchen. He took her face in both hands, careful certain the way he did everything that mattered, and he kissed her. Not like the first time for either of them, because it wasn't. It was the first time for the people they were now shaped by 3 months of work and trust, and the particular intimacy of fighting something hard together and coming out the other side still standing. When he pulled back, he kept his hands where they were. Spring, he said, quietly, like it was the name of something new. Spring, she agreed. Joe. They were married on the 15th of April. Ruth Henderson stood up for Clara. Tom Waverly stood up for Nathan, which surprised everyone, including Nathan, and which Tom himself explained by saying, "You're the man who started the fight. Seemed right." Mrs. Garrity made the cake. She had not been asked, she had simply appeared 2 days before with flour and butter, and the serene certainty of a woman who knew her own contributions were necessary. The office on Main Street opened the following Monday. Clara Bennett. Clara Cole, as of April 15th, though she kept Bennett on the office sign, because that was the name people had come to know, sat down at the desk in the front room on a Monday morning and opened her second ledger of new client correspondence. 3 letters were already waiting. 2 were from women in the county who had heard about the Alice Dormer case in Billings, which Clara had resolved in February with a letter to the creditor that was so thoroughly documented the man had reduced the debt by half without a single court filing. The 3rd was from a woman in Helena who had found Clara's name through Marcia's office. She read all 3 letters. She picked up her pen. She began. The Alice Dormer case turned out to be the first of many. Not all of them were fraud. Some were simpler estates that needed organizing accounts that had gotten away from people after a death or an illness, records that existed somewhere but needed someone to find them and make them legible. Clara took all of it. She charged fairly, worked thoroughly, and turned no one away for inability to pay in full if she believed the case was legitimate. By summer, she had 9 regular clients. By fall, she had 17. By the following spring, 1 year after the irises came up, she had a second desk in the office that she was considering how to fill. Nathan rode into town on a Thursday afternoon that April and found her at the desk with a stack of correspondence and an expression of intense concentration that he had learned meant she was 3 steps ahead of whatever she appeared to be doing. He sat in the chair across the desk, the client's chair worn already from regular use, and waited. She finished the letter she was writing, signed it, set it aside. "You're in town," she said. "I had a reason," he said. She looked at him. He reached into his vest pocket and took out a folded paper. "The railroad confirmed the spur line," he said, "through the North Valley. Land values are going to move." She stared at him. "When did this come in?" "This morning," he said, "by telegraph." She took the paper and read it. The spur line that Hayes had been trying to position himself for, the one that had motivated the entire scheme. The land acquisitions, the manufactured pressure on the county's smaller landholders, was coming through. But Hayes was in a territorial prison, and the land he had tried to acquire, the land he had taken from the Hendersons, the Carmodys, the Prices, had been returned to its rightful owners by court order, which meant the families who had survived the scheme were about to see their land triple in value. Clara set the paper down. "Ruth Henderson," she said. "I rode past her property this morning," Nathan said. "Stopped to tell her." She didn't say a word for about 30 seconds. Then she said, "Would you please leave so I can sit down?" Clara pressed her lips together. "And Tom Waverly," he said, and I'm quoting directly, "that son of a—" Nathan paused. He used words I won't repeat in this office. Clara looked at the paper again. She thought about a community hall in December. 31 people. A ledger open on a table. She thought about all the ways this could have gone if she had taken Hayes's settlement offer, if she had accepted the 40 cents on the dollar, if she had decided it wasn't her fight. She thought about the woman on the platform with $3.40 who had told herself maybe some people just weren't meant to be chosen. "Nathan," she said. You know what I keep thinking about. Tell me." "That first night," she said, "you gave me a room with a lock on the door. You put that latch on yourself in under 10 minutes, and you showed me it worked, and then you said goodnight." She looked at him. "You didn't ask anything. You didn't expect anything. You just gave me a place where I could decide what came next." She paused. "I've been thinking about how many people never get that. Not from anyone." Nathan was quiet. "That's why the office," he said. It wasn't a question. "That's why the office," she said. "And the second desk. And whatever comes after that." He looked at her for a long moment. "Come home for supper," he said. "I have 2 more letters to finish. They'll keep until tomorrow." She looked at the stack. She looked at him. She put down her pen. Walking back to the ranch that evening, Nathan had brought her horse, and they rode side by side on the main road in the April light. Clara thought about the word home and what it had meant at different points in her life. It had meant the house she'd grown up in before her parents died. It had meant the boarding house in Cheyenne badly, in the way that a place where you sleep is not necessarily a place where you belong. It had meant briefly and falsely the future that Edward Hayes's letters had described. And then it had meant a ranch 4 miles north of Red Willow with a spare room and a lock on the door and coffee. That was the one thing the man living there had gotten right. She understood now that home wasn't a place you arrived at. It was a thing you built. It was built from work and from honesty and from the particular courage of staying. When staying was harder than leaving. It was built from 2 people who had each lost something fundamental, deciding slowly, carefully, with their eyes open, that the thing they could build together was worth more than the safety of building nothing. She understood that she hadn't found a home in Red Willow. She had made one. The same way she had made the case. The same way she had made the office. The same way she had made out of 3 months and $3.40, and the spine that had apparently always been there, even when she hadn't known it. A life that was entirely unapologetically her own. That May, a young woman arrived on the afternoon train. Clara was at the station. She'd come to collect a package of documents from Marcia's office in Billings, sent by train, and she saw it happen in the way she had not seen anything in her own arrival, because she'd been too deep inside it. The platform cleared. The young woman sat on the bench with a small bag at her feet. Her name, Clara would learn, was Margaret Holt. She was 22 years old. She had come to Red Willow for a teaching position that turned out upon arrival to have been filled by someone else 3 weeks prior. She had no money for the return ticket. She had no one to wire. She had nowhere to go. She was not crying. She was simply sitting in the particular stillness of someone who has run out of next steps and hasn't yet found new ones. Clara collected her package. She looked at the young woman on the bench. She thought about a cold November platform. A worn leather suitcase. $3.40. She crossed the platform. She sat down beside Margaret Holt without introduction. "You look like someone who needs a cup of coffee," she said, "and someone to tell you what your options actually are." Margaret Holt looked at her. I didn't ask what you had," Clara said. "I asked if you wanted coffee." A pause. "Yes," Margaret said. "Please." Clara stood up. "My name is Clara Cole," she said. "I have an office 2 streets over. Come with me." Margaret Holt picked up her bag. And Clara Bennett, Clara Cole, who had once sat on this same bench with nothing, walked off the platform, beside a woman who had nothing toward an office that had been built precisely for this moment. Because she knew something now that she hadn't known the night Nathan Cole said, "Don't sit alone, miss." She knew that the gesture he had made, the coat placed beside a stranger, the hand extended without conditions, the room with a lock on the door, was not a small thing dressed up as ordinary. It was the kind of thing that changed the direction of a life. And she knew with the certainty of someone who had tested it against every hard thing the last 2 years had sent her, that one act of genuine human decency, offered without expectation and received without shame, was not the end of a story. It was always, without exception, the beginning of one.